All right. So good evening, everyone. And thank you for joining us. I know it's a little bit late in the day. So I want to thank the attendees, the participants, and I also want to especially thank our panelists. So I will introduce them in more detail in a minute, but we have Barbara, who is an egg donor. And we have Ralph and Justin, who are intended parents who have a little baby, 4 months old, Enzo, who may or may not be in the mood to join us. My name is Dr. Levy, and I am the medical director of the New England Fertility Institute. And I assume that probably all of you or most of you participated in the event over the weekend, the Men Having Baby event. And, you know, of course, I was just telling our panelists here that it was so refreshing to, after so long, to have a in-person event, to be able to see people face to face. And I know we've participated in these events for years, and I always feel a little bit bad because you see the people there that are coming and basically looking for information, and it's a little bit overwhelming. It's sort of a little bit of a sensory overload because there's so many different things happening and so many different talks. And at the end, I think you sort of have an opportunity to get the information, but everything is sort of thrown at you all at the same time. So we decided to actually offer this post-event webinar where we can sort of more calmly go over the process, and I can explain it to you. So I will start with that, and I will basically go over the medical process, IVF and egg donation and surrogacy. I'll try to keep it as short as I can because, again, each one of those topics, each one of those slides that I'll show you can be a topic for a whole conversation. But I think the main purpose for me for this evening's webinar is to basically get the perspective of the people that participate. So, of course, the intended parents who just had a baby and, went through this whole process with the ups and downs and, happily have a beautiful little boy. And of course, none of this would be possible without the egg donors, who basically are doing something that's an amazing gift. And I'd like, here's Enzo right there. I'd like Barbara to give us sort of her perspective on how she decided to become a donor and how she feels about it, and basically what's going on in her mind during this process. The only one missing here component is the surrogate, but we figured maybe we leave that for the next webinar. So I'm going to share the screen with you. So basically what I'd like to do, as I said, I'd like to explain the process very briefly, very quickly, just to put everything sort of in perspective. And I know for many of you listening to everyone who was there on over the weekend, it seems a little bit overwhelming. There's so many different things that have to happen just right, so many moving parts. And at the end, I think it's really, really helpful, really important for you to have a sort of a bird's eye view of the process, how it works. But then you have to sort of let go and basically work with the agency, work with the clinic, and they will basically guide you through the process. So just basically to show you, and again, I try to not make it too crazy, but of course, we always say that it takes a team to make it happen. So, we have, of course, the clinicians, and we have the case managers, and we have the scientists, the embryologists, the mental health professionals, the attorneys, the donor and the surrogate. And, somewhere it's not really in order, but the insurance brokers. So there's many, many different participants. Clearly something that would be very, very difficult for you to do on your own. And that's where, basically having a system, working with people who have experience, who've done it before, basically makes all the difference in the world. But basically, we look at it always as a team, and every member of the team is essential, and we all work together. So we'll talk today about the medical process, we'll talk about the support team, we'll talk about a little bit about the surrogacy agency, and then, of course, the intended parents and the donor. And very briefly, I mean, this is the process. And as I'm sure you know, this process is what we call in vitro fertilization. And we do the process basically in two parts, very distinct, separate parts. The first part is where we create the embryos. To do that, we need your sperm and we need the egg donor. We usually take the sperm ahead of time and freeze it. Again, you decide if you're using one or both partners. And then the donor goes through a course of medication, about a 2-week course, at the end of which he has a procedure, we call it the egg retrieval, where we harvest the eggs. Now, we always are very mindful of the donors and making sure that the process for them is simple enough and safe enough, because they're young, healthy women who basically will probably in most cases will be interested in having children. So we want to make sure that it's safe and it doesn't affect their future fertility, and basically make the experience fairly simple. So that holds both for the medication that we use that actually have come a long way and now are easier to use and have fewer side effects and actually more effective, as well as the procedure itself that has become a simple office procedure. It's done with an ultrasound, takes about 10 minutes with a little bit of sedation. So the donor basically, once the eggs are harvested, it takes a few days for her side effects to resolve, and her job is done. And then we have the eggs and we have the sperm, and we start creating embryos. And the idea when we create those embryos is basically we want at the end of this this process, to be able to identify the embryos that are the best candidates for pregnancy, the best of the best, the most viable. And we do two things to be able to do that, to identify those embryos. So one is that we grow them in the lab. That's pretty simple. We just watch them grow. And within basically 5 to 6 days, we go from a 1-cell fertilized egg to a 200-cell embryo. It's called a blastocyst. So that alone allows us to very quickly separate the viable from the non-viable embryos. Of course, we lose about 30 or 40% of the eggs because, again, they're not good. And then we have those blastocysts, and we know that even though they may look good, they're not always genetically normal, viable. So we take a step further and do the genetic testing for those embryos, where we can identify the chromosomes, and again, lose about 30, 40%, but we end up with the best of the best. And those embryos basically get frozen, and we have essentially the genetic profile for each one of the embryos. The embryos are frozen, essentially waiting for the surrogate. I say waiting for the surrogate because most of the time, the first part, the embryo creation, happens way before we have a surrogate. For most people, it doesn't take that long to find a donor. So most of the time, the embryos are there, and as soon as we have the surrogate, we can screen her, get the legal contract, and schedule the embryo transfer. What you see on the bottom is the success, and because of all the things that we do, we're able to get about 75 to 80% success with each embryo. I usually recommend to transfer one embryo, just because we worry about the risk of twin pregnancy. So even though the success is higher, there is a high probability of having twins. And if you are interested in having twins, I mean, of course, we can discuss, and we have to find a surrogate who's willing and able to carry twins. So how do you make the embryos? So as I said, we basically use your sperm. We do a sperm analysis to make sure the sperm is okay. That's usually the first step. And then you decide if you want to have embryos for both or just for one of the partners. And then we take the eggs and the sperm and we make embryos. So with the sperm, as I said, we test first, we freeze the sample. Again, we've come a long way, the technology, so freezing has absolutely no bearing on the viability of the sperm. At the time of freezing, we complete the testing that is required. And, you know, we all, of course, we work with couples who are not just local, but, you know, around the country and international. And what we can do in those cases is actually make all this happen locally so you don't have to travel here. I recommend especially if you're not that far away, even if it's a little bit of an effort, I think it's probably not a bad idea to come to the clinic. Mostly, you know, because give you an opportunity to meet the team, to meet me, to basically just get an impression of the clinic. Because again, you want to be as connected as you can to this process. But if that's difficult, it's not, we don't compromise in any way by doing the process remotely. And for the donors, of course, you know, we'll say, sort of stating the obvious, we're looking for women who are healthy and who have good eggs, who are able to produce a decent number of eggs. And fortunately, you know, we have all these tests that we can do to try to identify those women. So we're looking for young women under the age of 30, healthy, normal hormones. And basically, we look at what we call the ovarian reserve indicators that allow us to also predict how many eggs we'll get. And you know, if you see here, we're looking to get about 15 to 20 eggs because ultimately that usually translates into, you know, 4, 5, or 6 genetically normal embryos. So we go through the very extensive screening. I'm not going to go into details, but basically at the end, we probably eliminate, I'd say, about 95% of the applicants. So we go through a medical evaluation, psychological, genetic, infectious disease, and with all that information and more, we create what we call the donor profile. And the donor profiles is what we use to help you find your match. Match meaning a donor that meets whatever requirements you have. So the matching is a very personal thing. Whatever you want is fine. We just have to find the right donor. So, you know, we have our own database of donors. We have about close to 100 donors. And of course, even though you only need one, it has to be the right one. So basically, if you don't find a donor with us, we can help you go into other sources, other databases to make sure you find the right donor. But with all of that, and as difficult as it is for someone to find their match, usually, you know, most people actually don't take more than 1 or 2 months to find their donor. So, and again, it doesn't matter where the donor comes from, then I will make sure that you get all the screening. We're good? So everything I mentioned so far, we do ourselves, we do in the clinic. Of course, for the surrogacy part, we work with a surrogacy agency. The agency has their role, and the role is to find the surrogate. They do the legal arrangements, the insurance. They create an escrow account, and they basically provide the support throughout the whole process. We work very closely with the agency, and it's really, really important when you make your choice for agency and the clinic to make sure that the agency and the clinic have experience working together and basically are all on the same page. Because if you do that, then the process is almost seamless. So the agency basically will find you this candidate. You know, we have our medical requirements, the most important of which is the fact that she has her own children, which allows us then to review her history, pregnancies, complications, delivery, who the doctor was, which hospital, all of those things that basically allow us to be confident that with her next pregnancy, she'll do okay. The surrogates are typically, I'd say 30 to 40. We have younger and older. We look for someone who has a normal BMI. And then once we have a candidate that looks good on paper, we bring her to the clinic and complete her evaluation. So we do a medical evaluation, psychological evaluation, and a big part of it actually is to meet the parents. I think that's really, really important before you finalize that. You know, even if you can't make it in person, we can arrange for that to be done on video. And then once, you know, the surrogate is vetted and is approved, we basically let the agency know, you sign the contract with the agency, and then soon after, we can start making the preparation for the embryo transfer. So this sort of shows you just the sort of the timeline of the whole process. As I said, we start with the sperm, we make sure the sperm is okay. If it is okay, we freeze it, we do all the testing. In parallel, you start looking for the donor. As soon as you find the donor, we make the embryos. Also, in parallel, you start looking for the surrogate. Typically, it will take, you know, I would say with most agencies, somewhere between 6 and 8 months. So once we have the surrogate, we complete the contract, and then we schedule the embryo transfer. So again, keep in mind that the whole process from the beginning to end usually takes about 1.5 years, plus minus. 9 months of that is, of course, the pregnancy. And out of the remaining 9 months, I'd say the majority is basically waiting for the surrogate. So if you're looking to move quickly, it's probably a good idea to start all of 3 in parallel, as opposed to making the embryos and then at that point starting to look for a surrogate. But you know, again, each one has their own agenda, their own timeline, and whatever you decide to do is absolutely fine. So actually, if you see here on the panel, we have Stephen, who just joined us. Stephen Klappau is our Director of Marketing, and he's been a great help organizing these webinars. Unfortunately, Shante Bonilla, who is the Director of the program, is not able to join us today. But she's the one that basically will welcome you into the program. And what I didn't mention is for every client, every couple, individual that goes through this process, we assign we call them coordinators or case managers, someone who will basically be your guide and will help you with all these different things, help you arrange for the sperm, help you find your donor, work with the agency, all the things that are required to make sure the process moves smoothly. And finally, you know, you have my email here, and I'm very hands-on and very available. And at any point, if you have any question during the process or have any concerns, complaints, you can always reach me. So this is the end of my presentation, and I will actually be more than happy to answer questions. But really what this webinar is about the parents and about the donors. So, and again, I really thank Barbara and Ralph and Justin for being here with us. And maybe we start with Barbara, and I'll have Barbara introduce herself and tell us a little bit about herself and how she decided to be a donor and what her experience has been. Barbara, you have to unmute.
I was having a little bit of trouble with my internet, but I hope you can all hear me well right now.
We can hear you now.
Thank you so much for having me here, Doctor. I am happy to help and super happy to be able to connect with a bunch of new people who are thinking about being parents right now. What you guys are doing, I think it changes people's lives in so many different ways. And I decided, I'm from Brazil. I moved here 5.5 years ago. And when I was in college here in New York City, I met a girl who did the egg donation in the past. She told me about her experience and process. And that was always on top of my head, on the back. That's something that she told me. I kept it in there, but I never really looked into it. And last year, I think last year was around June, July, when the pandemic was happening. I obviously needed the money, and that was something that it just came back to me, and I decided to look into it. And I feel like a lot of young girls like me who are trying to make in their career, me as an immigrant trying to make in New York City, one of the first things we think when we learn about this is like, let me try to make some money out of it. But when you actually get into it, it's a crazy process. Like Dr. Levy said, there's a lot of education we have to go through. We go through also a lot of tests. I have been tested for absolutely everything that Dr. Levy mentioned in terms of my background. Wasn't England Fertility Institute, Shantai, and all. I'm sorry, can you guys still hear me?
Yeah, you're breaking up a little bit. The order, and we'll get back to Barbara when she gets back. Here she is.
So sorry, but I'm back. Can you guys hear me better now?
Yes, better.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, can you hear me better now with the video?
Yes.
Okay, amazing. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I was breaking and just reconnect now. Okay, but so where I stopped is basically I'm from Brazil, and I decided to jump into this because I feel like a lot of young women, so young girls are trying to make it a career. First of all, we think about this, like, let me go and try to do this because I can make extra money. But when you actually get into this, it's really complicated. It's a long process we go through. We have to check our mental health. We have to check our background in terms of healthy. So it's a long process we go through. And if it wasn't for New England Fertility Institute and Dr. Levy's team, I wouldn't make it, honestly, because a lot of hormones we go through. And to be honest, you have to have a lot of guts to inject yourself hormones every night, gives yourself 3 different injections for 2 weeks. So it's a lot. But one of the things that made me go through it's because when I did it twice, and when I was doing for the first time, I never met the parents, but Dr. Levy team told me that they were really good parents. They would be amazing parents. They were from Spain, and they chose me because they connected to me in a lot of different ways, for being a Latina, for liking me, liking my background in general. So I felt like if I didn't make it through, I would disappoint that family, and I would take it away the chance that they have of building a dream, of building their family. So at the end, we actually go through this not because we're going to make money out of it. We go through this because we actually want to help people. We want to help them conquer their dreams of having a family. And I come from a very traditional family in the south of Brazil. I'm from the south of Brazil, right next to Argentina. It's not the good part of Brazil where I come from. And like I said, I come from a very traditional kind of family. And where I'm from, gay people, it's not a real thing. People are very racist. They have a lot of preconcept. One of my cousins is gay and half of the family doesn't talk to him. So when I realized that I could also be an egg donor and help gay families, women or men, to build their families, build their dreams, it's something I would absolutely jump into it. I right now would definitely not do surrogacy, but that's something I'm not saying no forever. That's something I could absolutely maybe do it in the future. Not right now, absolutely not yet. But in general, I feel like being an egg donor changed my life, and the experience I had turned to be something way more rewarding because I got to help to build families I want to have one day, but I'm not ready for it.
So Barbara, how did you feel about, connecting, meeting the parents, having a, a relationship with the parents? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, so I never met the parents. Both times I did the donations, I never met the parents, but they know me. They asked videos from me. They asked, the first family actually asked videos from me talking to them in Spanish. So that was also something that made me connect to them to the next level and made me know this is great. It's a really great thing that you guys choose your donors, not because of how they look, but mainly because you check their backgrounds and you get that connection in a more intense level. So I never met them, but I feel super connected to them. I feel like if they chose me, there's a reason for that. And if one day they would like to meet me personally, I would be 100% open to that. I would love to meet the kids in the future if they like me to. That's absolutely a connection that I would never close the door for.
That's great. That's great. And how do you think you'd feel about the kids?
Amazing. Sometimes I wonder if they would look like me. And, I would absolutely love to meet them one day, for sure.
Great. Anything else, Barbara, that you think is going to be helpful?
I think one of the things that you guys really have to think through is don't choose your egg donor by how they look. Don't choose because it's a pretty girl. Don't choose them because you think they're just a good looking. Choose them because they're healthy, first of all. Choose them because you connect to them, to their background, the history they have in another level. Is that the kind of person that you can look at it one day and think, oh wow, there's a lot of similarities on you from your actual biological, your egg donor, and that's something you're gonna deal with forever. So absolutely think about connecting to the egg donor and liking that person in a level that it's not just by the look.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And, of course, it's a big decision to pick your donor.
Yeah.
That's going to be basically the genetic mother of your children.
Yeah.
And I do think that, as Barbara said, most of our donors, pretty much all of our donors are willing to meet the parents one way or another, whether it's on the phone or on a video or in person. But I think, there are certain things that you can only recognize when you meet someone, even if it's on video call, just their energy, their demeanor. And yeah, I think, of course, people look at the physical characteristic, the appearance, but I also agree with Barbara that many people pick their donors because then in some way they connect.
Yeah.
Whether it's some interest that they have, something that makes them feel close and connected to them. Great. So Barbara, if you don't mind staying with us for a little bit longer in case people have questions. But thank you so much for being a donor and thank you for participating.
Of course.
All right, guys, your turn. So Ralph and Justin basically I asked them just to give us sort of their take on the process. I think probably all of you that are out there anxious about getting started are sort of probably more interested in what they have to say than what I have to say. So go ahead, guys.
Thank you, Dr. Levy. It's getting close. It's getting close to Enzo's bedtime, so he might be a little vocal. So Justin and I started the process a few years ago, and we had matched with a surrogate, and it was actually serendipitous how things ended up happening, because it was actually our surrogate who had referred us to Dr. Levy and his team. Interestingly, our surrogate's mother had been a lifelong surrogate and had done it several times herself. I believe once or twice with Dr. Levy's office. So the way things sort of happened for us were just very serendipitous, and how we ended up with Dr. Levy and his team. But once we did end up there, things sort of happened very seamlessly. We were given a list of potential egg donors through his office, and what Barbara said, I think, is very true. Yes, you want somebody who sort of looks like you, your family, but I think personal characteristics, likes, are just as important, because you want your child to blend and fit in. And one of the things we liked about our egg donor was her love of family, her choice in food. She specifically wrote in her profile that she enjoyed Italian food, so we knew right away that she was the one.
That was it.
Yeah, that was the clincher right there. Sorry, bud. And as an added bonus, she kind of looked a little bit like a combination of my sister and his sister, so we got that as well. But I think what Barbara said is true. You definitely want to pick an egg donor just for more than just how they appear, but what their personalities are like, and things like that. So we had selected an egg donor, and then the process just went exactly like Dr. Levy had explained. We ended up with transferring embryos, I think about just over a year ago now.
Yep.
Right? Because 9 months, so just about a year ago now was when we did our transfer. We got a call from the office a few weeks later that our pregnancy test was positive. We prayed and prayed and prayed, and just things fell into place. And 9 months later, we ended up with this little guy, or not so little guy. And he's everything and more, anything we could have asked for. And he brings a joy to our lives every day, more and more, for sure.
Yeah, it's sort of amazing. I mean, for me, it's just still, after all these years, it's still amazing to see the products, right? The little ones. Because it's an amazing thing, and it's still a miracle, despite all the technology and everything else that goes into it. At the end, it's really, really hard to explain.
No, for sure. And sorry, I'm trying to mute in between the cries.
I think he wants to go to bed.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Yeah, no, absolutely. And, I think it's important to remember that having a child is a miracle. And, the process is something that you have to take step by step. And you just have to keep pushing, keep trying, and keep hoping. And at the end of the day, you will succeed. It's just a matter of finding the right people, finding the right support, and persevering. But having a child in any way, I think, is a miracle. And this was certainly something that at the end of the day brought us our own little miracle, for sure. I have a question. So when you were actually where these people are that are in this webinar, like trying to get information, trying to understand, what was like the biggest obstacle, the biggest hurdle?
I'd say probably the surrogacy process was probably the most concerning, just because of the legal part of it. So we had a lot of questions around the legal part.
And also at the time that we had started, there were restrictions in various states because of laws that had existed with surrogacy, particularly in New Jersey and New York State at the time.
Yeah.
So it sort of limited our pool of potential surrogates. So I think that sort of made the process a little bit harder for us at the time.
So as far as for the egg donor, did you have any, I mean, other than the profile, did you have any contact, any connection?
No. We actually, we explored multiple options. We looked at, because there are egg donor agencies, and we did look at that, but I think your staff was amazing during that process for us. I mean, they answered every question that we had. They gave us cell phone numbers. They answered emails whenever we sent them. But yeah, I think we were pretty.
And how about the surrogate? Was it difficult to be comfortable with the surrogate?
So to be honest, it was a little awkward at first.
Yeah.
We kind of tried to like get to know each other a little better. So before and after every visit, we would plan a dinner. We took her to breakfast. We would take her to lunch. We tried to like buy her just little things, like we would get like a pineapple keychain, or we bought her like a pineapple T-shirt because, of course, you know, pineapple is the fertility sign.
Yes.
And I think that helped. And she would come with her mom, and her mom actually made it easier because she was not a several time surrogate, she was an 11-time surrogate. So she was definitely very experienced and definitely helped us. But yeah, I mean, like any relationship in the beginning, it's awkward, but after a few dates, you kind of get comfortable with each other. You know, we started texting and checking in with her, and really the therapist that we saw helped advise on that, and helped us kind of build that relationship with her.
Right. And she was nearby too. Fortunately, she was in Pennsylvania, so not too far away. So close enough that we were able to go to important medical visits, ultrasounds, and things like that. So having her nearby was also sort of helpful in building that relationship, I think. And to be honest, even after the process and Enzo was born, we even had spoken briefly about, you know, maybe even swinging by and making like a yearly or every other year trip out there, because she has a son as well. So we said, you know, let's meet at, you know, Hershey Park or something once a year with the kids and hang out. And she seemed to be pretty into that. So I think a relationship, like Justin said, you know, like any relationship, it is what you make of it. And I think you can probably make it into something as much or as little as you want. So for us, it worked out for sure.
Right. Well, it's really, I mean, you know, at the end, it's also a matching process, right? You have to find the person who's a good match for you.
Right. And I don't want to, I mean, we definitely had gone through a few potential surrogates before we matched. So I don't want to make it seem like this happened right away. It was a process. And I think in one of your slides, you know, you did mention that it can take a year or so before you're matched. So I don't want to make it sound like all of a sudden we found the surrogate. We did have a process, and it did take a little bit before we found somebody that, you know, wanted to match with us and that we wanted to match with. So it did take a few profiles. We had phone calls with a few of them. But I think you know, you're right. It is a process, and it did take a little bit to find the right person.
No, I know, and we know we don't call it a journey for nothing. I mean, it's basically is a journey. And so, what do you have any words of wisdom for people that are sort of just about to start or
I for sure. I think the one thing I would say for people who are just starting out is don't let one person's experience or journey sort of paint what you think is going to happen with you. I think everyone's journey is different in various ways. So I would recommend trying to talk to as many people, trying to hear about different experiences from as many different couples or single parents as possible. Because like I said, everyone's experience is going to be different, and it's a good idea to sort of hear different stories from different people for sure. Yeah,
Totally. I think you hit the nail on the head.
Great. And then, you know, it's okay. And then the other thing I would say too to intended parents is that you know, this is a process, and to your point about calling it a journey, and it doesn't happen overnight. And you know, for some people it may happen in a couple years, and some people it might take longer. But I think one of the things that was that Justin and I sort of agreed on is that we were going to keep moving forward regardless of what happened, because we knew that having a child was definitely something we wanted from very early on in our relationship. So even when we had hurdles that or roadblocks that we hit, we sort of continued pushing. We, you know, looked for answers, and we just kept going. So the other piece of advice I would have for intended parents is don't get discouraged. Not everyone's story is unique, and you probably will hit some roadblocks and some challenges, but there are probably things that can be overcome. You just have to keep fighting for what you want.
Great, thank you. So I think we're open to, if anybody has any questions to the panel or to me, we're more than happy to answer. Don't be shy. this is your chance. We have a question here. Would it be possible in the future to have a baby with both dad's DNA? That's a big one. Who knows, right? I mean, actually, there's just a paper about this group of scientists who are able to basically grow an embryo in the laboratory it was a mouse embryo almost throughout the entire pregnancy. The same group actually is working on trying to create sperm and eggs from stem cells. So God knows, I mean, I think this field, one of the reasons that I love it so much is that it's constantly changing and there's major advancements all the time. So maybe one day. Another question about a sibling journey. And, when the couple has their baby and they usually have embryos, and at some point, depending, I guess, on different factors, including how well, the baby sort of sleeps through the night, and whenever they're ready, when they're ready to have the second. I'll just say a few words and then maybe we'll ask Justin and Ralph to comment. As I said, I mean, more and more we do a single embryo transfer, and more and more gay couples come into this process hoping to have 2 children at least, one for each partner. So that means that if you only have one baby at a time, then you need to do another journey to have a second. So that's becoming, more common. In the past, we used to do more twins, not so much anymore. Now, as far as the sibling journey, there's a few things about that. Of course, you need to decide when you're ready. And again, it depends on many different factors, but basically ultimately it's your decision. In most cases, there are embryos that are frozen from the original cycle, which means that these are embryos from the same genetic mother. And then it's a matter of the surrogate. And I say that, in most cases, when you have a good relationship with the surrogate and she had a good experience in a sort of an uncomplicated pregnancy, in most cases, those surrogates will agree to do it again. Depending on the type of delivery, earliest is probably 6 months, but most people wait a little bit longer. Ralph, Justin, any comments on that?
Yeah, well, we originally transferred 2 embryos just because we thought we wanted twins. But I think in hindsight, things worked out the way they were supposed to be. I don't know how we would have managed twins right now. I think we definitely need at least a year gap, at least so maybe he's like walking and can, and we don't have to carry him around because I don't think my back could take 2 babies. So yeah, I agree with what you said about at least a 6-month gap. I think for us, we do have 11 remaining embryos because we had a very successful egg retrieval at your clinic. So yeah, we're just, we'll find the right time. I think when you know.
Yeah.
So I agree. Yeah.
Do you think your surrogate will do it again?
Yeah. So I asked her about it in the hospital, and she's like, I think I want to have one more of my own, and then totally I'm open to doing it again. So we're keeping it as a possibility.
Yeah, cool. Question for Justin and Ralph. How did you find your surrogate? Did you use an agency? Which one and why?
Yeah, so we found Reproductive Possibilities, which is in Montvale, New Jersey, and it's run by Melissa Brisbane. And we chose that agency because we were referred by a friend who had just had a successful journey involving Melissa and her team. On top of that, it was also, they're a little bit less than some of the other agencies, and they required less money up front. And full transparency, Ralph and I did not have all of the available funds. We funded some of it through a loan. So, that ultimately led us to that agency.
Next question is, how long are the frozen embryos viable for, and how many viable embryos do you usually have from one harvesting? So I think I covered that. So basically, I know I rushed through it a little bit, but when we freeze the embryos, and again, that's one of the advancements, I'd say breakthroughs in the IVF in our world, is that we have the technology now to freeze sperm and embryos and eggs in a way that doesn't affect their viability. So there's the method that we use is called vitrification. It works really well. And the embryos are frozen and stored in liquid nitrogen, which is, again, very different from keeping chicken in your freezer, because it allows you to basically keep them frozen indefinitely, which is a little strange when you think about it, but it's true. So it doesn't really matter whether the embryos are frozen for a week, a month, a year, or 5 years. We actually had somebody last year come in. I don't know why they waited, but they waited 13 years. They had a kid who was 13 years old, and they had embryos. And finally they said, okay, now it's the time. And the embryos strangely look exactly the way they did on the day they were frozen. So yeah, so that's the answer. Usually from as far as how many embryos to expect, as I said, we usually expect about 20 eggs, close to, and about 4 to 6 genetically normal embryos. Question about twin pregnancy. Does twin pregnancy usually goes okay in natural? I'm sorry. Is twin pregnancy with IVF more at risk than twin pregnancy from natural cycles? No. Twin pregnancy basically is not different when it's through IVF. With IVF, we sort of have the luxury or the advantage of choosing the surrogate, because if you are interested in having twins, we have to find the right surrogate who is not only willing, but we think is able to carry twins. Because again, I mean, if you look at women who conceive for the first time, never having had a pregnancy, then the risk is sort of unknown, and I highly recommend against it, because, again, there's a very high probability of premature delivery. But with surrogates, it's different because you can choose. But there's no difference, and the real risk, the big risk, is the premature delivery. Question: my sister may donate her eggs to us, but she's 35 years old. Would that be okay? So that's the thing. I mean, most people that need an egg donor don't have that luxury, right? They don't have someone who will donate for them. But every once in a while, there's a sister, a friend, a family member, and that's okay. And in fact, usually the people that you would bring in may not basically, fit our criteria for a donor. So, for example, 35-year-old applicant will not qualify to be in our database, but she's your sister, so that's sort of a big deal. And so we will actually look at her objectively and make sure that her ovarian function is good enough. I mean, 35 actually is still young, I mean, for fertility purposes. So we do basically the same workup. We, of course, maybe put a little bit more emphasis on the psychological assessment, because after all, she's your sister and she's always going to be your sister. So making sure that everyone sort of understands what they're getting into. But yeah, it's absolutely fine. And we have actually donors who are sisters who are older than 35 who did very well. Let's see, 3 questions. Let's start with the first one. How long do you keep the embryos? Where do you keep them? We keep them until you tell us that you don't want them anymore. Then you can tell us if you want them discarded or donated to somebody else. So the answer is, like I said, because the embryos basically don't have an expiration date, we need at some point someone, you need to make a decision. So the other question is go with the genetic testing. As I said, we make sure the embryos are normal. That's why we do it. But almost as a bonus, we of course get to know the gender of the embryo. So the question is whether you can choose. The answer is yes. However, some people actually don't want to know. So they say, you pick the best embryos. We don't really want to know. So this again is entirely up to you. What happens if no embryos are available due to attrition? Thankfully, it doesn't happen very often. But if it does happen, when it does happen, I feel very committed to this process for you. And if that happens, I will basically let you choose another donor without any additional cost. Do you see any couples navigating surrogacy and adoption both in parallel? Any specific comment about that? Yes, again, what we talked about today is one of several ways to do it. Adoption is perfectly fine. If that's what you want, it's a little bit difficult just because of the availability, and the process is tough. And at the end, it's almost to the last minute, you don't know for sure if it's going to go through. But yeah, absolutely, if that's something you want to pursue. Co-parenting is another option that people choose to do. People do what's called traditional surrogacy. Not so much anymore, and we don't do that, but where the donor, actually the surrogate is also the egg donor. Yeah, so there's many different ways to do to have a family, and what basically we talked about today is the one way that we do it, which allows you basically to use your genetic material and an egg donor and a surrogate, and gives you basically control of who you choose for both. Our friend may be our surrogate. She's over 40 years old. Would that be okay? Probably yes. For surrogates, it's a little bit different than what I mentioned about egg donors, because for the surrogates, they must have children. So whether she's your surrogate, your friend, your family member, or an agency surrogate, that's a requirement. And it's important for many reasons. I told you the medical reason, because we can review her records, her history, but also the fact that it's different when a surrogate basically completed her family and now wants to do this for you, as opposed to somebody who's never had children. Also, there are some risks in being pregnant, one of which is you can basically lose your uterus. So we are, very particular about that. But specifically about the age, I personally don't think it matters. I think, again, one of the things we've learned through the IVF process, that for women, there's a fairly limited window of opportunity, a reproductive window, but it's all about the eggs. So when a woman gets to be 40 or 41 or 42, her chances of becoming pregnant naturally, or even with treatment, go down very dramatically, but it's all about the eggs. So if you take that 45-year-old woman and give her a normal embryo, which we do with the egg donation, and her chances of success are the same as someone who's 30. So again, she can be 40, is healthy, with children. We put her through the evaluation. And we have actually many surrogates who are between 40 and 45 that are just great. How do you differentiate, I don't like this, how do you differentiate IVF clinic from others? I mean, it's a hard question. I think really as far as you know, I would say we're sort of a smallish clinic. You know, when I left the university, one of the reasons that I left is because I didn't like the way, basically, I didn't like the way that the clients were treated. You know, I think, especially in our field, you know, you can't downplay the emotional part of this process is very, very large and important. And it's not just about the technology, and it's not just about becoming pregnant. And, you know, strangely, you know, I see patients that have been elsewhere and had a baby and are leaving because they didn't like the experience. So I think that's one thing that makes us different. I mean, you know, I'm the only doctor. I have an amazing, amazing team, and we really, really pay attention. On top of it, you know, of course, without saying, we have to have a good clinical team, and you have to have a good laboratory team, embryology team. So, and we do, and we have, you know, as far as success of IVF, we have, I'd say, we're in par with the biggest clinics in the country. But again, the best way is to, if you're not sure, is just to meet a few clinics and just get a feel and then make a decision. Question for Justin and Ralph. Did you choose to have a son based on genetic testing or spin of the wheel? You don't have to answer.
No, we chose based on genetic testing. So like I said, we implanted 2 embryos. So we chose the best male and the best female embryo.
The question about our offices, you know, we have our main office is in Connecticut. We had an office in New York until COVID. So we're still in the process of trying to figure out, just because I used to go there regularly and see clients there in person, but with COVID, we're doing most of our meetings on Zoom. So I'm sure we will. Not in the near future, but for the moment, our office is in Connecticut. The consultation is usually, first one is done on Zoom. I basically see what, you know, talk to you, figure out a little bit more about you and what you're looking to do. And then we lay out the plan. So at some point, if you're local, if you live in the city, coming to Connecticut, you know, we're an hour north of New York City. To give a sperm sample, to meet the team is not such a big deal. But really, I mean, the number of visits that you need to make to the clinic, well, actually, you don't really need to come to the clinic. But I would say before COVID, what we used to do is basically, we used to bring you here for the sperm. We used to bring you in to meet the surrogate, and we would recommend or invite you to be here for the embryo transfer. So now it's all changed, and, you know, again, it's probably going to go back maybe at some point. Somebody says that I'm surprised that Dada and Papa do not look so tired.
We're hiding it well. We're exhausted.
A question for Justin and Ralph. What were the legal hardships you went through with your journey?
We didn't have any hardships per se. I think maybe one of the pain points was just during the surrogate contract negotiation. The surrogate wanted additional paid time off from work. But, you know, between our lawyer and her lawyer, we were able to come to a middle ground. So it wasn't really a hardship. I think it was probably much easier than I expected. That was really the only thing that we had to negotiate. Everything else was standard. Like most of these surrogacy contracts are standard, and both sides agreed to everything in the standard contract. It was just that one point about the additional time off.
Yeah.
I have a question for you. I mean, I know that you're basically, your baby was sort of a COVID baby, right?
Yeah.
and born during COVID. How did that, how did that feel? How did it, I guess at some point during the pregnancy, the vaccine did become available. So how did you handle that?
I don't think it was that difficult.
Yeah, I mean, we had a little trepidation, like most people had during the pandemic. So I think aside from that, it was okay.
The surrogate, did she get vaccinated?
He didn't.
No, we talked about that and we agreed that that she would wait. I mean, I think we would have been okay with her getting vaccinated, but she was hesitant. And we were a little hesitant, so it kind of worked out. Yeah, I think the only negative I think was that we could not both be in the delivery room, but
Oh, right. So that was it. Right. I forgot about
but
that.
after seeing Ralph did sneak a video, and after seeing the video, I don't think I would have. I don't think I would have survived.
So I didn't, just to clarify, I didn't sneak anything. Everything was done with permission. But yeah, that was the one thing. That was the one thing that probably COVID did put a little bit of a damper on, was that the hospital did have restrictions in terms of the number of people allowed in the delivery room. So unfortunately, only one of us was allowed in. But right after Enzo was born, we were given our own private room to sort of do bonding time, the three of us. So it worked out, but that was the one thing that I think COVID kind of put a damper on.
Well, and you know what, I think you sort of got caught right in the middle, because I
Right.
think for most of your pregnancy, the vaccine wasn't approved yet for pregnant women.
Right.
Correct, exactly. As a matter of fact, I don't think it was approved until after Enzo was born, if I'm remembering
Probably
correctly.
around March or April that they
Correct.
started recommending it. But yeah,
Correct.
so
Exactly.
but now, of course, it is a thing, right? Because the vaccine is available and is obviously safe. Pretty much everyone recommends it for women who are trying to be pregnant, women who are pregnant already. And as everyone knows, there's sort of some people and some surrogates that absolutely won't agree to be vaccinated, and that creates a little bit of more hardship to find a surrogate, because I'd say that almost all the parents prefer the surrogate to be vaccinated. For some of them, it's a deal breaker if she won't. Others are reluctantly would accept it. My opinion is that there's no reason not to, and I think it's the fact that it's become such a political thing is a little strange and ridiculous.
Sure.
But yeah, it is a thing now, and it was not when you were starting your process.
Right, exactly.
Maybe last question here. Did you have your surrogate provide breast milk?
No, we did not, but she was willing to.
Right.
It was just a personal decision for us to use formula. Just our own
Yeah. Yep.
personal preference.
Yeah, and I think most surrogates feel this way. I mean, if you ask, if you want to, and you ask, they will agree.
Yes. Yep.
All right, so yeah, I think this is it. Again, I want to thank Ralph and Justin and Enzo for being good for most of it. And Barbara, thank you so much. And everybody else, I appreciate you being here so late, and I hope this was helpful. And please, if you have any questions, anything else that I would I'll be more than happy to meet with you and go over your particular case. So thank you again for being here, and good luck to all of you. I think Enzo needs a haircut. All right, take care.
Have a good night, y'all.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Barbara.